Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Witchy Business. This episode is a special one today. We are joined by our friend Sarah Matlock, who is a maturation coach. And before we get into introducing you, Sarah, I just want to talk about the divine meetings that we both had with you, because you obviously were a maturation coach, same as Anna, and we met on our breathwork training. And I just love that. And now we're all friends.
What about this?
Yeah. It was really cool because we met and I felt so drawn to you. And I remember saying to you, you posted in the Facebook group that we have for our training, and you did a post, and I just knew instantly, I was like, I just feel so drawn to her. We're going to be friends. And then we were in a small group together, and that's how we got to know each other. And then we realized that you and Anna knew each other, and so cool.
It's such a weird triangle, but I do love it. And when we put together the pieces, which was quite a long time afterwards, I just remember thinking how hilarious it was. And yeah. And this is the first time that I've spoken to both of you simultaneously. So weird, but we'll go with it.
Let's see how we go. So tell us more about you and what you do.
So I'm Sarah, and I'm a maturation coach, and then I also trained with you to teach breathwork and meditation, and I have also done a training on like holding women's circles as well. I've been on a pretty wild ride, my own sort of personal development journey over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. Basically becoming a mother was like, bam, upgrade. You're going to rewrite the way that you do things, the beliefs that you have, undo it all. So that's the process that I'm going through, to be honest, and I continue to go through, and I don't think I'm ever going to stop, because I love it. But so I'm a coach predominantly. That's what I spend most of my time doing, but I also just love being in group spaces with people, and I love learning stuff. I'm such a nerd, as you both know. Before all of this, I'm a fully qualified chemistry teacher. So I also love all of the science that comes in, and all of the nervous system, the juicy biology, sciencey stuff. So that's me.
You're also a book lover.
Oh yes. Oh yes.
Oh, and after this we need to chat about the Seven Sisters book that's just come out. Side note.
We could do a whole thing on it, but we'll pause.
We'll pause for that one.
So we are going to be talking about good girl syndrome, because Anna and I have recorded an episode on this, but we love chatting to you. I feel like you're so wise. Everything you say, we're like hanging on to it. So we want to get your thoughts on this, and see where this conversation leads us, as we always do with this podcast. So
go on.
Why don't we start with what is good girl syndrome? And
so I guess, assuming that people haven't heard your first episode on good girl syndrome that you guys did, sort of my way of talking about good girl syndrome is like the conditioning that women have gone through, and I'm not just talking about in the last few years, I mean decades, centuries, of what it means to be a good female member of society. And I think that comes down to being compliant and not rocking the boat and maintaining the status quo. And, it wasn't that long ago that women were the property of men. If you think about the 1960s, 1970s, where you had to have a husband to open your own bank account, even if you think today about modern day, marriage ceremonies, like the father gives the daughter to the husband. And so I think there's like an underlying like set of beliefs that get put in place for women to become like marriageable, to marry well, so they'll be well looked after, which then has a massive impact on the way in which we show up and the way in which we behave and the way in which we interact with each other and other people. I mean, I think it's also then got this whole other aspect that's come in, and I can think back. I mean, I went to an all-girls school for 13 years of my education, so I know what it is to be a good girl, and to be in a very female-dominated environment. Except it was also raised with this like good girl 2.0, which is the independent woman, i.e., you should be able to have it all, run your household, have a successful marriage, have a successful career, raise successful children, and do it all by yourself. Don't need anything. You know, so often when people say to me, how are you in the world? I'm not talking about like you guys, but like I will talk about my family. I will talk about my household rather than me. And so, yeah, I'm doing the good girl. It's something I'm really passionate about. I love it. And I just think also raising, I mean, my son's 5, but yeah, raising a child, you can see the like good. It's good. What's bad? Everywhere.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What does that show up as? Like symptoms of it, or how would you describe it in everyday life?
What you mean in terms of like parenting?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a few things. I mean, I watched some clips this morning of a debate about like children crying on airplanes. And you know, if I think about the stress and anxiety I felt taking my child for the first time, he was 3 months old, we flew to Geneva, and I was terrified of what was going to happen when we were like trapped on the airplane, like trapped, the words I use, the judgment. You know, I remember being the person on the plane that would hear a baby screaming and would think, oh God, that parent's not doing a very good job, or what's wrong with that child? Whereas now, you know, I'm happy to let my kid cry as much as he wants. Now, that's not like leaving him to cry on his own, but like to be supportive and hold them and support their regulation, because that's what children need. If they feel dysregulated, they need another adult to support their regulation. And so, yeah, I see that all the time. The number of times you see like, and God, my kid triggers the shit out of me. I hope we're allowed to swear. But, you know, little things like whining, like a whiny voice, or demanding something, shouting, not saying please and thank you. Like there are times when it can literally create like a visceral reaction where I'll go, are you going to say please? And then I'm like, but why? Like, who is that serving? Like, you know, I want to raise a polite, well-mannered member of society, but I want to do it because they're choosing to do it rather than because they think they have to do it to be accepted. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, or to receive what they need or want.
Yeah.
I'm going to backtrack just a little bit on how you're talking about like the good girl 2.0 and having to do everything by yourself.
Yeah.
Because I mean, we've spoken about this so many times, and yet that still really landed.
Yeah.
Because I think in a way, like personally, I don't really identify with like the good girl wanting to please everyone, but the good girl 2.0, as you put it, like, yep, that's 100%.
Because the good girl can have whatever she wants as long as she can get it for herself.
Yeah.
Like,
And
she's not
this
supposed
is-
to have needs. She's not supposed to have needs. She's supposed to put everyone else's needs in front of hers. But if she does need something, if she can't get it for herself, well, then she can't have it.
yeah.
Mm.
And it's like, as long as she works hard enough to justify getting it, because she can't just get it. Like, imagine that. That's just
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that resonates so much with me. But then I think about the flip side, like, what would it be like not to feel like that?
yeah. I've no
What do
idea.
What do you mean?
Like, what does it feel like to just think that you can receive or be part of society without needing to justify your place there or deserve your place there?
Yeah.
But I
Does
think
that-
that's the thing. Like, a baby comes into the world,
Mm.
you know, when we're in the womb, like, we're not hungry, we're never like hot, we're never cold, like, we're like in this perfect little bubble, and then we come out into the world, and it's not surprised that a baby like screams as the first thing that happens, because it's like, it's bright, it's cold, it's loud, it's overwhelming. And then the only way that a baby can communicate from being really, really, really small is to cry if it needs something. And they will unashamedly, like unapologetically scream for what they want when they're little, until they learn not to, you know, until they learn that their cries won't be listened to or won't be responded to, until they learn. And, you know, I remember like being out sometime, and like my kid was having a tantrum, and somebody said something like, oh, like he's just manipulating you, he's just getting what he wants by screaming. And I was like, don't think he's got that cognitive ability at the age of 2 to scream to get what he wants and manipulate me. He screams because he wants to get what he wants. Like, I remember that there's other thing someone said, it's like, kids are the world's best salespeople because they want what they want because they want it. Like, if my kid could have a magazine every time I went to the shop, like, he's fairly certain that he could just have, like, he should just have it because just should.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether he had one 20 minutes ago when we went to the previous shop. Like, they just want it. But it's that thing of, then, like, we learn over time that, like, if you want something, then you've got to earn it, or you've got to, you know, like,
Deserve
it. But we already do. And I think that's the massive unlearning, is realizing that we already do, we already are. And then coming from that place of the one that just is and that just wants. And it's not outrageous to ask for things that you want, and to ask for things that you desire in the world, just because you want them.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's even in, you know, sales and messaging and media, like, spa days are kind of branded as treat yourself, you know, and that ties into, you can only have this as a special treat, not just you can't just have a massage just because you want one. And so it's constantly reinforced, isn't it, in every part of life.
Yeah. You even have to look back, like rewatching like Disney movies as an adult blows my mind. Like, constantly, when you see time and time again how reinforced, like, you know, if you think about like a Cinderella or Snow White, and it's like these characters that the end goal is to get like swept up by Prince Charming and happily ever after.
And they have to be perfect in order for that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that layer of like the way that they are isn't just enough to.
Well, I think that's the other thing, is that like the way that girls are raised, we're like and I can see it in like the difference between boys and girls in my kids' class. Like, boys are like praised for the things that they do. Like, did you see how fast he ran? Did you see that thing he did? Did you hear what he said? Whereas girls are praised for like who they are. Like, oh, hasn't she got such pretty hair? Oh, isn't she polite? Oh, look at her lovely dress. Like, no kid, no adult has ever said to my son any of those things. Oh, aren't you polite? Haven't you got lovely hair? Like, don't you look pretty today?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, and it's so early that starts. No one said to my son, like, oh, go on, give us, like, have a little smile, like, give us a smile.
Just hearing you say that makes me so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder, because we have the experience of the good girl syndrome. What do you reckon that is like from the male perspective? Because we all have this, like, I believe that there's like this need to be good in a way that doesn't serve either gender. Like, what for you would be like the good boy syndrome?
Yeah.
I think it's a similar sort of thing, is that like you're either a good boy or you're a bad boy. And I think it's almost like it's a bit more acceptable for men to be the bad boy. Like, for a girl to be bad, it's not that, like, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of, for boys, and I can think about it when I was teaching, like my favorite groups to teach were like the bottom set GCSE classes. Like, one of my jobs when I worked my way up the school was that I had a duty day where when a kid was misbehaving in class, I'd go and pick them up to take them to detention. And like the bad boys, like the naughty boys who couldn't concentrate in class, who hated sitting still, all of that sort of stuff, they were like my favorite ones. They just wanted attention, and they couldn't get it because if they weren't clever enough, or they weren't smart enough, or they weren't the best at kicking a football, or they weren't like, it's then like, well, where do you fit in? And I think the same thing exists, you know, it does exist, but it's I think there's a difference in terms of like how easy it is for men to ask for things that they want compared to women. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist for men. Like, it definitely does. Like, we all know people pleasing men. We all know men that go into a fawn response. But I think, I mean, it's a different conversation, really, isn't it? Because I think it is a different experience.
Yeah, it's so interesting to just like inquire into, because it's things we don't have like full answers to. I think they're the topics that are like the most but it's so true, like how early it starts. It's pretty crazy when we look at it, and then seeing like how it's like so insidious how it comes up in our adult lives, of having to catch yourself, of seeing like, oh, I'm doing this to try and please. Sometimes it's not even a person, it's like a belief that someone will think that, like, that person to please doesn't even need to be there anymore, but we're still trying to please them.
But I think it's also, you know, if there's not somebody that you're trying to like live up to the expectation of, we've then internalized our own expectations. Like, and I think actually, like, one of the biggest challenges personally that I've found is actually overcoming my own internal critical voice. Like, you know, we will do whatever we can to maintain this illusion of like, we've got it together, we can do it, we're juggling all the balls, we're doing all the things that makes us acceptable outside. But at the same time as doing that, we will constantly be criticizing ourselves. And like, if there's one thing that a good girl is good at, it is like having the most vicious internal conversations, like the most vicious internal dialogue. And it's as you realize that and you're like, whoa, like I am so horrible to myself. And then when you begin to speak it out loud, you know, like even last week, I had some crazy like thoughts that were going around in my mind. And I actually called my parents. I was like, can I come round? Because I just need to talk to you. And I sat them down and I was like, look, I need to tell you some of the things that I'm telling myself, because I know that it's crazy. I know that nobody thinks this, but I have to tell you that this is where my mind goes to. And thankfully, my parents are like quite used to me going, okay, I'm just going to share this with you now. And then they're like, of course, we don't think that. That's ridiculous. No one's ever said that to you. But it's like that internal voice that's then just like, ooh, like really horrible, really horrible.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, it is really sad when you think about that, because you wouldn't say the things that you're saying to yourself to someone else, would you?
No. Wouldn't even dream of it.
Yeah.
It wouldn't even cross my mind.
Yeah.
And I would probably tell you like the opposite. Like, yeah. And I would never tell you half of the things that I tell myself, you know.
Yeah.
And I would tell you, like, if you were to tell me what I tell myself, I would be telling you the complete opposite and showing you like how everything's seen differently, yet doing it to me is impossible. Well,
Yeah.
not impossible, but very,
Yeah.
yeah.
Would you say it's linked with things like imposter syndrome? And
I
because I
don't
kind
think
of,
it's a syndrome.
you don't. Oh, okay.
I think
Expand.
imposter syndrome is like it's like a word to put on like feelings of shame and not being good enough. I don't think it exists separately to that. I think it's something that people have said to be like, oh, I've got imposter syndrome, I can't do that. Like,
Yeah.
I don't like, I mean, I know it's a thing, right? But like, I don't separate it from the two, because it's exactly the same experience. Like, I don't deserve to be here. I'm not good enough to be here. Who am I to be here? Interchangeably. It's the same experience as the good girl. It's the same place it's coming from, of like, I've got to earn this. I've got to deserve this. I've got to prove that I'm good enough. Otherwise, I'm going to be doubting myself. Keep me stuck in my place. Keep me small. Maintain the status quo.
Yeah.
So then you see the same, and I think that's the thing with imposter syndrome. Then you end up seeing the same faces, hearing the same voices that you've always seen and heard, because the voices that you're not hearing, the conversations that you're not hearing, aren't going to come out if people think, well, no one's ever said this or no one's ever done this, so who am I to do it?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So how can someone recognize that they have good girl syndrome? Like, are there kind of common thought patterns, or, you know, just to kind of get started with?
Yeah, I think it's a real sense of like good enough, like, or not feeling good enough. Like, I think there's a sense of inadequacy and like a striving and a pushing, and like, it's like you're trying to get, you know, people say like, oh, I'll be happy when. I think that's a really good indicator. Or if people are like, oh, well, I can't do that because I'm not good enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I don't have enough time, or I don't have enough support. Like, I think it's when you're prioritizing other people's needs over yourself, prioritizing what other people want, or I'm not going to talk about this because it might make that person uncomfortable, or yeah, I'm not going to do this because it might affect this person, or I then might be tired and then I can't do this, and like the ripple effect. And I think it's also the inability to say no. When people ask you to do things and you're just like, yeah, of course, and it just then piles on, so then there's just more and more and more stuff, and you can feel like you're drowning, but it's like, I've just got to keep going until you break. I think burnout, anyone that's experienced burnout, I think they have to have a significant degree of good girl there to push, and even I think success, like I think a lot of very successful people also have it. I've done some work with like female founders of like early stage startups, and like these people have like got really cool ideas, they've like created really cool businesses, they've raised loads of money, they've done it all on their own, and then they're at the point where it's like, okay, now I need to hire people, and I need to delegate responsibility, and I need to give this bit to this person, and I need to get somebody to be in charge of that. And then there's like this freeze and overwhelm of like, but I've got to be the one that does all the things. I can't possibly rely on anybody else to do anything for me. So I think there's lots of signs of it, but yeah, just trying to do it all. Support is like a very key one.
Yeah. You know what I've just realized? Hustle culture thrives on good girls.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like there's a rise in Gen Z asking for what they want and saying no to low salary, saying no to working all the hours and all of that. Do you think that is related to good girl, and maybe they're more conscious and more aware? Or why do you think that they are having that approach now to working and asking for what they want?
Yeah, I don't know. I've not thought about that. I mean, I definitely agree with you on the bit about hustle culture really thriving on the good girl. But no, I've not really thought about Gen Z. I mean, there's definitely been more of conversations around like mental health, so maybe they're just more aware of it earlier,
Yeah.
30 before anyone ever had like, I don't know how, but I spent my entire 20s having no idea I was suffering from anxiety. Like I was,
yeah, same.
I was just like having a great career, having a great life, like ticking all the boxes. Yeah. And I had no idea that fundamentally I was running on cortisol and adrenaline.
Yeah.
And looking back, I had quite a lot of anxiety, but I was completely oblivious. Like you can't see what you can't see. And so maybe with Gen Z, there is awareness.
Yeah.
And there is, that encouragement, and it's a bit less ingrained in them because they've had a few years less of practicing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. No, I don't know either. I just wanted to get your thoughts, but I think that's a really good point. And I guess social media does contribute positively in that way, probably, because we do see more and more examples of people, particularly women, doing what they want, unapologetically just being themselves. And I wonder if, that plays a big part in it.
But then I also think there's a really interesting aspect of like, it may look like they are, but there's like that insta reality, isn't there? Like, what's the truth? And I think there's a really interesting like awareness to bring to that, of like,
Yeah.
what is the truth? How do people actually feel? What does it bring up in them? Like,
And
yeah.
I was going to ask, like, I wonder if when something's done so much as a reaction against something, then you're still so, like, if you're doing these things to not be a good girl, are you becoming like good girl 3.0?
Oh God.
Because if the good girl was the one who was, you know, in the 50s going to be that perfect wife, and then the 2.0 was the one who wasn't going to be also perfect wife and do all the things by herself, like, is this actually just like a 3.0 version of, because you're still trying to please like the people in your cohort or your generation by being a certain way.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, actually, like, you know, I feel like it's almost a rebellion in some ways, the way in which I run my business, in terms of how much focus I put on prioritizing motherhood in my business, because it goes against so much of like what it should look like to have a business. Like, and like, I've had people say to me, yeah, but you could just get a nanny, or you could just like get a childminder to pick up. And I'm like, no, I want to be there. I want to do all the things. I want to be on the PTA. I want to like go to all the football matches. Like, and I also want to be unapologetic in the fact that I'm going to build my business and scale my business in a way that feels manageable and feels good to me, so that I can do all of those things. Because like, I think like one thing's like, for me, is like, I really feel like it's been underrated how much women are like the navigators. Like, I really think, like, for mothers, like, I'm speaking specifically about mothers here, but like, as like that navigator, like that captain at the helm of the ship, like, you get to make the decisions, or I feel like I get to make the decisions of like how I do stuff, like how I run my household. Obviously my husband's with me, like, that's cool, but like, you know, he does his jobs, like he goes to work, he does the stuff that he wants to do. And part of my like thing I love is nurturing the fact that he can do the things that he loves, that my son can do the stuff that he loves, that I can then also have space to do the stuff that I love, and managing and like holding it all in a way that then also feels really good to me, rather than me being like, I'm juggling all these balls of all these things that feel completely overwhelming. But it's like, everyone's got their space to do their stuff. And I think, you know, if I look back to my granny, like, you know, she raised 4 children, 4 kids under the age of 5 she had, with a husband that worked away from home like 5 days a week. And she had loads of hobbies. She didn't have like, she wasn't working, but she was working. She was working hard. And like, you know, I'm fairly certain my grandpa would think that he was like the man of the household and like ran things. It was my granny, really. And I think that's the thing. It's like, rather than being like the quiet woman that just like puts dinner on the table and does that, like, I love doing that too. And like, I think actually we can do that if we want to, or if you want to go and work in a higher powered job in the like whatever, like, do whatever you want. I think that's the point. It's like, what do you want to do? How can you do the thing you want to do? What would bring you so much joy?
Yeah.
And then doing it.
And when you say that, it brings me back to the conversation with Gen Z, because I feel like you need to have life experience to be able to deconstruct your own conditioning. You know, to be able to know, is this a choice because intrinsically it's something that I want, or is it something that I'm conditioned to want? To be able to know the difference, you need, I feel very old saying this. You need a few years. Because how else do you know if it's conditioning or you? Because it's so like, part of the weaving of who you are, that to distinguish the two, just you need a bit of time to kind of like do one, rebel against the other, come back to the first one, like just find your way and shape it in your own way.
But I think that's also part of the like, what do you want? Like, it's that question of what do you want? And then you try something, you know, like if I like one of the things that started me in all of this is like, I remember doing an exercise when I was like 15, 16 at school, and it's like, where do you want to be by the time you're 30? And I remember having this entire checklist. And when I was 30, I had every single thing on my checklist. And I literally remember thinking like, okay, I'm married, I've got a child, I've got a house, I've got a car, I've got a credit card, I've got a pet, like, got a career, like, and I remember just being like, oh my God, why am I not happy? And also, what do I do now? Because like, I've got everything that I thought I wanted. So what do I do now? What do I even want next? And I think it's really interesting because then you can think about, okay, like I want this. And I think there's two things. Firstly, you have to be okay with wanting something, getting that thing, and then realizing that actually it wasn't what you wanted at all. You know, as we learn in maturation, like you can never have enough of what you never really wanted. Like none of those things were what I wanted. And you also have to be okay with wanting something, asking for it, and being told no. And then refining it, like to the proper trial and error. Because I think there's also that bit of if you want something, like you say you really, really want something, and then you get the thing, and then it doesn't feel the way you thought it was going to. And then it's almost like that shame that then comes from like, well, you said that you wanted this and you still don't feel good. So shame, guilt, terrible person, clearly there's something wrong with you. You know, that internal voice can then immediately flare up of like, yeah.
Yeah. So trial and error is the way forward. Experiment, be curious.
Yeah.
Is what you're saying. Yeah.
And to play with it as well. You know, like I think when you said earlier, Anna, about like, you know, being the bad girl, what would she do? You know, what would she do? And sometimes I think it's like, you know, eating chocolate after you've brushed your teeth. I know that sounds really, really bad, but like, I mean, it actually doesn't feel that good because then the chocolate tastes weird because you've got like minty. So like, there's some things it's like, whoa, you know. But I think it has to be that trial and error of what is it. And I mean, there are aspects of being a good girl that I love, you know, it serves me in so many ways. But it's when it becomes more beyond that it's uncomfortable and it does not work.
And it's like, especially when it's like against yourself, when you become the one, the instigator of your good girl syndrome on yourself, because it's like easier to tell someone else to fuck off and do whatever you want, but it's harder when it comes from you.
Yeah, and it's also then realizing how many of our beliefs are internalized ourselves. You know, how much we ourselves generate that reality of not wanting to be rejected, of not wanting to be abandoned, of
because that's it, isn't it? It's always like a way to not be rejected and abandoned. It's a way to be accepted.
Well, that's the thing, like there's that real primal part of our brain that says you need to exist within a herd, like the human being pack. And so it's really dangerous for us to be independent, really, because what we want is to be accepted by others. And so if we reject ourselves in order to feel like we're fitting in with others, like yeah, that I think there's like that real internalized belief that you have to do it a certain way. And also as well, like being rejected potentially by some who don't get it, and then you find like your tribe, like you find your people, and then you realize that you can accept, and I think as well, like then the acceptance that you get from other people is why I love like group programs of stuff.
Yeah.
Acceptance that comes from other people who are just like, yes, like, yeah, I fully accept all of that. Which
Non-judgmental.
Yeah. And it makes me like, just like imposter syndrome. I get that this is like one of those words that's overly used, but we've spoken about it before with Em about being hypersensitive and just being hyper aware of people. And when you were talking, I'm seeing the link between wanting to be accepted so bad and that like deep internalized need to be a good girl and that hyper awareness and hypersensitivity, because then you become hyper aware of what everybody else is doing and saying as a way to better adapt to what they want and expect from you.
Yeah, was the fawn response, isn't it?
If
you think about nervous system dysregulation, we talk about like fight, flight, freeze, but there's also fawn, which is the fourth one that people talk about, which essentially is a sense that your nervous system is dysregulated, like you're in a heightened state, and that's the place that you're coming from, which then also makes sense. I mean, from a maturation context, like who is the one that is generating this perception of reality? Well, it's the little girl who had needs and they weren't met, and not like necessarily through any big like capital T trauma or anything like that, but just because her experience of feeling dysregulated then generated or was met with dysregulation from the adult that was with them, who was unable to show them how to regulate. And I think that's the thing for me, is like actually like the undoing of the good girl is all about like reparenting ourselves, because that's what brings us back into a state of regulation. You know, Em and I meeting during our breathwork and meditation like training, I think like it's all about like that embodiment and that sense of safety that you can generate within yourself using practices like that. And then the same with like the maturation, you know, which is where we met, Anna, like seeing the story and dismantling it. Because I mean, you could have all the affirmations in the world, and if the one that's saying the affirmations is the one that fundamentally believes that they probably don't deserve to do any of it or have any of it, or nothing's going to change. So it's changing the real context of like where you're coming from in it. Which is massive.
What does being a good girl stop you from, like, really ultimately, like what does it stop you from doing or being?
I think it stops me from fully allowing myself to be myself in all situations. I think it generates this filter or this lens of like, this is the version of me that exists in this world, this is the version of me that exists in that world, like almost like the like outfits you put on, who gets to see you. And I think there's so many layers to it, because also I don't think that everyone deserves to see all of you, because I also think there's like a real like, I think there's a real magic of really having like, you know, like intimacy, like, you know, if you break down intimacy, it's like into me see, like you have to earn that, like there has to be trust that comes with that, and there has to be like a worthiness that comes with that. But yeah, equally, I also would quite like to get to a point where I don't really care what anyone thinks, so that if somebody does meet me being fully me and they go, oh, don't like you, then that doesn't, like, it's like water off a duck's back. But I think that's going to take a long time of deconditioning for me to fully get there. But, you know, I think that's, and every time I find another layer of it, I'm just like, oh, there she is again. There she is again. It's that constant exploration.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I saw this this meme on Instagram the other day. I think I sent it to you, Anna, but it said, I can't remember exactly what it said, but it was something along the lines of meeting new people, me telling my whole life story without anyone asking, and then laughing awkwardly at the end. And I just thought that was so hilarious. And I fully relate to that, because what you're saying about, like, not everyone deserves, or not everyone, you know, you don't have to share your whole self with everyone. You don't have to share, like, you know, certain versions with everyone. And I wonder, that meme, I really relate to that. And I guess that is part of good girl syndrome, isn't it? Because it's like, I need to just tell everyone everything, because otherwise there's going to be an awkward silence and da 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 da. Yeah.
I'll show all of me to them, but it's never all of you. It's like a version or a part of you that
Yeah. Well, it's that tightrope between, like, being too much or not enough. And it's like this, where do you exist along the middle? Like, you know, I can think of people that I've met where I've, like, gone into overshare mode and just, like, too much. I can think of other people that I've met where I've been very, like, reserved, and they were probably like, oh, she was a bit like, not much to her, or a bit standoffish. And so it's that, like, and I think it's also, like, allowing that, you know, the first time you have a conversation with somebody, you're not going to know them. Even like the 50th, 100th time you've had a conversation with somebody, you're never going to fully know them, because we also change all the time.
Yeah, there's something in what you said, like the discomfort and being able to hold, like, regulate yourself in that discomfort, that person is only going to know a certain version of you, and is it the right version?
And perceive you from wherever they're coming from at that point in time.
That is really uncomfortable.
I keep thinking of, like, how it comes up in different cultures, and, like, I only know of, you know, 2 or 3 from having grown up the way I did, but it's so interesting to me to think, like, how good girl would show up in other cultures. Like, I think in some countries it's so much bigger than it is for us in the West, but then, like, big is probably not the right word, but more stereotypically good girl than, whereas us, like, having grown up, we're a bit too old for that, but, like, in more, like, Western countries, it's more like that 2.0 version. But, like, how that was different for our mothers, because they were, or our grandmothers, like, generations before, and it's so layered. I just find it really fascinating to start to think about. And it's like one of those topics that you can, like, talk about and deconstruct for so long. And I know there's no, like, solution and tools to resolve something, but I do have a question around that. Like, what are your practices and things that you've put in place that help you come back to your true, authentic self when you see that who you're being is the good girl?
I think it's seeing it. So seeing it's the good girl again.
Yeah.
Then being with whatever comes with it from that point. So how is it appearing? So like, is it appearing as shame? You know, because I think there's a flavor that comes with the shame, or guilt, and what that looks like. Or is it coming up through the realm of like resentment or anger or comparison? You know, like, they've got something that I'm never going to get, or that I don't know, whatever it looks like, but that comparison of it, like the rage, that's a good one. And so I think it's meeting, like, I think for me, it's always meeting myself where I'm at, because I can have the shame and the guilt that will then generate the rage, or I could have the rage that starts it that could then generate the shame and the guilt. I think that like fear as well. I think there's you could probably go through any of the emotions and attach it to it, but it's being with whatever's there at the time. I think it's actually being really curious about what the things are that, like, the story is that's been generated around it. So what is it that I'm saying to myself, or saying about myself, or saying about the other person, actually, because sometimes it can come up as judgment of others. You know, if you think about the thing that you find most most uncomfortable about somebody, that usually is like a reflection on you, and it's mirroring something back. And seeing it, and then trying to create safety, but creating the space and the safety for that. There's nothing you need to actually do with it. I think that's probably the mistake, is trying to do anything with it and trying to do the anger. But yeah, I think there's a few things, like, you know, I always think, if I think back, like, retrospectively to, like, you know, the song, like, I Can Buy Myself Flowers, that was like,
oh yes, we do.
we know Miley, we know.
I don't, like, a brain blank, or I couldn't remember who'd sung it. Like, I think it's really interesting, because I remember, like, a few years ago saying to my husband, you never buy me flowers. You never buy me flowers. But I wanted flowers, right? And so it was easier for me to, like, judge him and shame him. You never do that. Like, it's your fault. I could have asked him, can you buy me flowers? I'd buy myself flowers. But, like, what is it that I want? I want flowers in the house. And I think that's the thing, is it's like, it's getting to the bottom of what the want is. Like, anytime there's, like, a criticism of something, of yourself or of somebody else, I think there's a real underlying, like, what is it that I want under here? What is it that's actually going on under here? I should go and speak to those people, or I should do that exercise, or I should eat that food. Like, what is it actually underneath it all that you want? Yeah. I don't know if that answers the question. I sort of went a bit all over the place there, but
Love it. Definitely did.
Yeah.
And just...
yeah. Processing. Yeah. Yeah. Because also, I guess it's in the what you think you shouldn't do as well, right? Like, oh, I shouldn't eat that. But what is that?
Yeah.
What do you want? Yeah.
And assuming. I think that's the other thing. You know, like, we talk in maturation a lot about, like, being with the emotions, and, like, you know, when the shame came up for me last week, and it was so strong, and I went and spoke to my parents, which helped, but it was still there. And all of the usual things that I would do to, like, numb it or suppress it, or, like, avoid it weren't working, obviously. And I think it was that thing, like I was making assumptions about what I should do or how it should feel. And actually, as soon as I stopped assuming and I stopped trying to control it and I stopped trying to do something with it, actually, that's when it just shifted. Because I was like, it's just here, it's just shame, it's okay. I'm okay. And then it was like, okay, it's sort of melting away now. It's sort of dissolving away, and I could see where it had come from. I could see why it had been triggered. And as soon as I stopped trying to hold on to it or try to do something with it, that's when it then actually started to move and shift and release, which it's really hard for a good girl to not do. Yeah.
Yeah, which ties into hustle culture as well, doesn't it? Because that's very doing and yeah. So interesting. Is there anything else before we wrap up? Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I don't know, really. So what do I want to share? I think for me, it's all about like, what do we want? And really being unashamed in asking for what we want and believing that we deserve it.
Yeah.
And anytime there's like a constriction or a rule put in place around it, I think that's the point at which, like, if there's like a should or a but it, and any of those limiting things, that's when I'm like, okay, we're going in there. Like, that's where my curiosity is piqued, because I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go look at that, because what is this? And I think also slowing down is so important, you know, like when you're on that like treadmill and you're trying to get somewhere, you're missing like the experience that's right here. And so I think for me, like the more that you can slow down, like that's where the magic is. It's uncomfortable though, if you're used to being like on the go and doing all the things, but really creating space to actually do nothing is quite magic when you can lean into the discomfort that comes with that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to share, because when you were asking like what do you want, all I can see is Ryan Gosling in The Notebook.
What do you want?
And she's like, it's not that simple. Like, so now I'm just gonna imagine Ryan Gosling asking me what I want, and I feel like it's just
nice.
Well,
it's like the oh god, now I've forgotten who it is. What Women Want, you know the film?
Yes.
Want, which I think I probably need to go and rewatch, because it's probably the most like gender stereotypical thing, like, but I think that's the thing, like, what do we want? Like, what do we want to see in the world? What do we want to create in the world? What do we want to like? And I think that's the other thing, is like, how can you enjoy it as well? You know, it's not about like doing it to the detriment of like all the fun and all the play and all the joy. And yeah, I think that's the aliveness part, isn't it? It's like the vibrancy and the juiciness. Like, what's the point in it if we collapse into bed at the end of the day being like, oh, I'm exhausted, oh, I've not done enough, or I've not like, or it's like that satisfying, like, I mean, and I know we'll talk to human design plenty of times, like I'm a generator, like, but that real sense of satisfaction for me is like absolutely when I know that I'm on the money. Like, if I'm doing something that lights me up, yes. If I go to bed at night and I feel really satisfied, yes, that's my that's my aim.
Yeah, I feel like that's a beautiful place to end this episode. Can you please let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, so Instagram is probably the best place to find me, first of all, which is Sarah Matlock Coaching, or my website, which is sarahmatlock.co.uk. And yeah, always happy to have people come and chat to me about anything. Most of my Instagram is my pets or my chickens, so be prepared for that. But yeah, anyone wants to come and say hi, would be very welcome.
We'll link everything in the show notes as usual. Thank you so much.
Thank you.